So, before we begin, I'd like to update you guys on some of the shenanigans that I've been up to lately. So, yesterday, after making the recording, I received a surprise phone call from my friend Laura of Posh and Pristine Events. And for those of you who've been listening from day one, you'll remember that she is partly responsible for me starting this podcast in the first place. Because she's the one that first told me that hey, looks like you're good in sales and customer service. Why don't you come and teach some of my people? Because I think these are handy skills when it comes to growing a business. And so in her wedding school, I think it's, is it Wedding Planner NG or something like that? And I can't remember. I'll get the proper Instagram handles and put them in the show notes. So, so she has these classes where she teaches people how to become wedding planners. And in her own opinion, the technical element is not just the important thing we have to pay attention to, but also things on the sales and the customer service side. And that is how this journey began, which has ultimately ended up with me adding sales consultancy to the roster of things that I do. So anyway, so she called and she told me that the Abuja Wedding Planners Association was having an end of year get together and wanted to know if I could attend. So it was last minute, but the timing was okay. It was evening time, and so I said, sure, no problem. I'll be there for about an hour. And after I was done with pickup and everything, and the kids were okay and were done with prep for exams, because currently in Nigeria, I'm not sure what the school system is nationwide, but anyway, for those of us in Abuja right now, kids are currently writing exams. So a lot of the past couple of days has been homework and exam prep and stuff like that. So after we're done with exam prep, I got dressed, I got fly, and I head out, and I went to go meet them, and it was at gosh, I can't remember the name of the venue, but it's in Garki anyway. And they really put together a good show. I mean, they had lights, pyrotechnics, fire, dancer. What else? There was a magician. Of course, there was food and drink. They had some really good palm wine over there, and all in all, they put together a really good show. And so it occurred to me that for all the for all the proselytizing that I've been doing over here on the podcast about the need for professionalism and belonging to professional agencies, it just occurred to me that I haven't really spoken about one. Sorry, excuse me, Hamatan, and so I have another cold upon me again. Forgive me. I know this is unprofessional. But don't worry, eventually one day I'll be able to afford having an editor, and the editor will remove all the ums and ahs and the coughs. So where was I? Okay, yes, so I've spoken a lot about professionalism and why we need to, it's a good idea for all these initiatives that are popping off all over the place. Abuja Wedding Planners Association, that Lagos wedding photography thing coming up in Benue State. There's this wedding cake makers association, and I haven't heard of, I think in the east it's like there's some sort of association of makeup professionals and something like that. Anyway, so all the associations are really good, and you have multiple benefits because we increase our professionalism. There's knowledge transfer. Those who have more experience in the field, those people who've been at it for 5 to 10 years, like I am, we get to teach the younger ones. But a really good advantage of these things is that more often than not, when we are at weddings, is because we are we're service professionals, and we're taking care of deliverables. So it's nice to be able to show up to an event where you don't have to do absolutely anything, and your job is just to be there, enjoy the music, to dance, to get drunk, and to have a good time. And basically, that was just part of the agenda for last night. And it was good food, it was good company, it was good vibes, it was good music, and is another good idea for why, if you are not affiliated or associated with any of these sorts of organizations, you should, because you have professional benefits. But then these social benefits are also there as well, because you can get to kick back and relax at the end of the year and have a very good time. So that's just letting you guys know what I was up to yesterday in my personal time. Yeah, in my personal time. I should have spent that time, researching some of the sales calls that I had to make. But eventually, I spent the time with good company, good food, and good drinks. Okay, so now to the agenda of the day. We started off how to close the deal. That was yesterday, and we looked at the question of whether closing in real estate is different from closing in any other field. So whether closing in real estate, closing in weddings, or closing in retail, assuming you sell clothes, if there was any significant difference. And I believe we wrapped up at the idea that the differences, if any, will be determined by whether you're dealing with a simple or a complex sales scenario or a complex sales context. So today I want us to look at that question. What is the key determinant for how do you determine what's a simple sales scenario and what's a complex sale scenario? Now remember that for Kairos Real Estate, the examples that the ladies came up with were okay. Well, they were not all ladies. There was one guy, but the two examples that we used throughout the whole training session, that's clothes versus real estate, were proposed by the ladies. So the test case, if you could put it that way, that we ran with for Kairos Real Estate was buying clothes versus buying and selling real estate. And so, intuitively, it's very clear that one is a complex sales scenario and the other is a simple sales scenario. And so we spent some time trying to tease out the specifics. What makes one simple, what makes one complex? And we arrived at a couple of things. One was the deal size or the amount. So dresses, clothes, even if they are expensive, I mean, in a Nigerian context anyway, the most you're doing is you're spending tens of thousands, which is not the same as spending millions or hundreds of millions or tens of millions when you're dealing with real estate, when you're dealing with housing. And so that is one of the key determinants when you're looking at simple sales situations versus complex sales situations. So obviously, the larger the amount, the more complex the sales situation is. And I've always thought it's a good idea, at least when addressing wedding planners. That's not just with Laura's Wedding Planning Academy, but other wedding planning academies that I've spoken at. It's a good idea for us to give some serious thought as to whether weddings are simple sales scenarios or complex sales scenarios. Okay, we'll have to break it down according to the service. So whether trying to close the deal on a wedding planning score or wedding photography, whether that's a simple sales situation or a complex sales situation. So what I'm just going to do, I mean, there's some arguments that can be made one way or another, but I think it's enough for us to just tease out what the determining factors are and then leave you guys as wonderfully creative individuals to try and come up with answers on your own. So the more amount of money that we're dealing with, the more complex it is. The less money that we're dealing with, the more complicated it is. So buying egusi or vegetables in the market, simple sales scenario. Buying real estate, complex sales scenario. Buying a dress, I guess maybe it's simple, but if you're going to look at it from, in a relative sense, comparing buying a dress to buying egusi on the other hand, you will see that the level of complexity is greater. So don't think of it in terms of fixed. Don't think of it in terms of fixed definitions, but rather a sliding scale. So it's always going to be relative whether something is a simple or a complex sales scenario. So we're done with the first criteria. Was it criterion? It's something I should check and be sure. So we're done with the first criterion or criteria, which is the deal size or the amount. Now the next one is the subject complexity. Some subjects are just inherently much more complex than the others. So when it comes to buying a house, there's lots of moving parts. There's legal title to the property, legal title to the land, building specifications. What else? Lots of things. Financing. There are lots of moving parts when it comes to buying real estate. And so because of that, it is something that is relatively complex. Buying a dress, buying a watch, not as complex and not the same as egusi. Buying egusi or vegetables in the market. So if you are a wedding planner and you're trying to close the deal for if you're trying to close the deal to be the wedding planner, then you can see that in this case, there's some complexity involved on your own end because as the wedding planner, you're juggling quite a lot. The wedding planner has to juggle the budgets, other vendors, other stakeholders, what else? So wedding planners have to juggle a lot, but wedding photographers, in comparison, are juggling relatively less because I'm just dealing with my own small sphere of influence, which is photography and the buying decisions around that. So, in a sense, you could say that yes, it's still a wedding, but if you are a wedding planner, you're dealing with a larger level of complexity than a wedding photographer is. And this is one of the reasons why I say that we shouldn't just try and come up with fixed definitions, but try and examine and see how it applies to our own particular context. Because you can say that planning a wedding is a complex sales scenario, but then if you're a wedding photographer, for instance, is it really that complex? It may not be. And let's look at those our brothers and sisters who do the pyrotechnics, the what's it called? Yeah, the pyrotechnics. The what are those things? Those flashy stuff. Those, I don't want to call them firecrackers. They're not firecrackers. Gosh, I can't remember the name. Firecrackers or fire whatever. Those bright stuff that shoot off during the couple dance and that will make a huge part of wedding photography. So anyway, so if you're dealing with pyrotechnics, then you're dealing with even less complexity than the wedding photographer. So it's a sliding scale. So we can't just say weddings complex sales scenario. It would depend. If all you're selling is pyrotechnics, it's relatively a lot simple. If you're a wedding photographer, there's a lot more at stake. You have to deal with a whole lot more. Some more people, bride, groom, maybe some members of the family. So there's some complexity, and ultimately, the wedding planner is dealing with the most level of complexity. And then there's also the number of parties concerned. For complexity. Let's just say the more moving parts you have, or the more things you have to balance, then the more complex it is. So a pyro person, not too many moving parts. You just have 5 or 6 sticks that blow up, into firecrackers. So that's not too complex a situation. But for the wedding photographer, there are lots of parts you have to move around. Bride and groom, getting ready times, size of albums, what else? Bridal train, decision making, who is going to pay for it, and what else. So that's how you should look at it when it comes to complexity. How many moving parts are you dealing with? And then finally, we've got the number of the parties. That is also something that determines whether you're dealing with a complex or a simple sales scenario. So back to the dress and house example. If it's a dress, it's very simple. The lady before you, that's the only person you have to deal with. Or the man before you, if he's buying for his wife, that's the only person you have to deal with. But if it comes to doing real estate, it's very rare, at least in this context, that a man is going to buy a house and not consult with his wife, or the other way around, that a woman will buy a house and not consult with her husband, or that both of them will go ahead with buying the house without talking to the banker to see if they can afford the financing or whatever, assuming it's not going to be an all cash transaction where they just drop 400 million for the house or whatever, assuming people do that kind of thing, like just walk around and drop loads of money. Anyway, so where was I? Yeah, the number of parties. Yes, so for the real estate example, you've seen that the number of parties increases. It's not just man and wife, the banker, financier. If they have kids, and maybe they have kids of, older kids, they want to ask the children's opinions. Okay, mommy and I were thinking of buying a house in the village. What do you think? So the children's opinion is important. That, okay, yes, all of us are in Canada, but still, why are you going to the village? Why not just buy a house in Abuja? Why not just buy a house in Lagos? The decision-making unit becomes larger. You're dealing with more parties. And so you can also ask yourself that question when it comes to weddings, that are we a simple sales scenario or a complex sales scenario, depending on the number of parties? It depends. If you sell drinks, typically you're only dealing with the groom. At least that's what I hear from my friend Nana of 365 Bottlers. There was a time when I wanted to see if we could do some stuff together, some joint marketing. And at the end of the day, it became obvious it was not going to work because while at the time I was mostly dealing with brides, he was mostly dealing with grooms or some other male member of the family, because 365 Bottlers, that's what they do. Alcohol, drinks, spirits, fine wines, that sort of thing. So typically he's dealing with the groom or the male member of some other family. So the number of parties that we're dealing with, that is also what determines the simplicity or the complexity of the sales situation. So primarily, these are questions that we have to ask ourselves, whether we sell real estate, whether we sell dresses or wristwatches, or whether we are involved in the wedding industry. So you're a planner, you're a photographer, or you do pyrotechnics or the cake. These are some of the things that you have to look at to determine whether you're in a simple situation or a complex sales situation. What's the deal size? How much amount? How much money are you guys looking at? How much complexity is there? How many moving parts are you guys dealing with? And how many parties are you talking to or negotiating with? So these are the primary things that we have to look at to answer that question. So, what's the answer? I'm not going to give a definite answer. Apply it to your own context. Because, like I've shown, it's not the same for the pyro person. The people who do all those. I don't know why I can't remember the name. It just skipped my mind. Anyway, so the people who do all those firecrackers are not in the same situation as those of us who provide the photography and videography, and we are definitely not in the same situation as the person who is doing the overall planning and coordinating for the day. And there's one more factor to determine whether you're in the simple or complex sales scenario, and that's the desirability of future relationships. People in simple sales scenarios don't often care about whether there's a long-term relationship or not. So if you sell a goods in the market, you like the person to be your customer, but if you just get this current deal at the good price for now, for today, you're happy. If they come back tomorrow, you're not really bothered. And it's the same if you sell a watch or a dress. It'll be nice if you guys are chummy and you're in contact for a long time. But if you win this sale, you're good. Even though you should be concerned about long-term relationship. But when things become much more complex, like say on the real estate end, for instance, especially if you're going to acquire real estate for your investment portfolio, then it's desirable that you guys maintain relationships for the future. Because if you do good business with this guy today and you get good property for your investment portfolio, you would like to have the guy's phone number, and both of you would like to be in touch so that when the seller has more inventory or when you have more money and you're looking for more things to put in your investment portfolio, both of you would want to call up each other and do business again because you already know each other, you like each other, and you trust each other. And so it's the same with sales. So is there a desirability for future relationships? Again, it depends. When it comes to the pyro person, the person who is selling those knockouts, those bangers, those firecrackers, does the bride really want to have that person's number over the long term because she might need firecrackers again in the future? Well, arguably, maybe not. Would the bride and the groom like to keep the wedding photographer's number? Yeah, they might, because children will be down the line. They might want to do family portraits or maybe end-of-year party over at the office. And it's the same with the wedding planner. So you see, it's kind of a sliding scale, and it depends according to your situation. So, we'll just cap it up here. So that's how you can tell whether you're in a simple sales versus a complex sales scenario. Ask yourself, what's the deal size? How much money are you guys spending? How many moving parts? Is this very complex? How many number of parties? How many people am I negotiating with? 1, 5, 6, 10? And is it desirable for us to maintain future relationships? Those are the key things. Now, the reason why you should ask yourself these questions, whether you're in a simple scenario versus a complex scenario, is because that very answer will determine how you are going to continue selling in the future. And so with that, we will bring today's recording to a close, and then we'll answer the question at our recording from tomorrow. And so from tomorrow, that's the question we're going to be looking at. Once you have determined that you're in a simple situation or a complex sales situation, how does that determine how you're going to sell going forward? So that's the good stuff that you have to look forward to. So thank you very much for listening to the Sales for the Nigerian Wedding Industry podcast. I'm your host, Abuja-based sales consultant and event media professional, Tavishima Ayede. Thanks for your time and attention. I'll catch you guys at the next recording.